Hello ladies and gentlemen. In this video I will be going in depth with an analysis of Bungie's Halo 1 Combat Evolved. This video is not a play the game or skip the game kind of video, it's just like an in-depth analysis with me talking about Halo single player and everything it really did right and new that goes sort of underappreciated nowadays. I think Halo 1 is a pivotal cornerstone of modern video games, and I highly recommend playing the game before watching the rest of this video. Considered to be the flagship series for Microsoft's Xbox line of consoles, Halo 1 is considered to be the grandfather of modern-day shooters, and it innovated on a lot of concepts that we see in a lot of games now that just weren't common back in 2001. With first-person shooters being bashed by several parts of the internet nowadays, I wanted to go back to a time when the most praised games were the ones in first person, where you shot stuff. There are things Halo 1 does that I'm going to highlight in this video that really go unnoticed and unappreciated, and I think it's because of some of the stuff that really led Halo to be a better game than most at the time. One of those reasons, and in my opinion probably the strongest one, at least in a narrative sense, is Halo's conveyance of exploration. What I mean by that is Halo is a game about exploring, and the way it conveys exploration is done impressively well. So well, in fact, that people don't even notice it. I'll be showing how the game works around exploration, but I want to give the game some context first. The plot of Halo 1 is not that complicated, and its simplicity is due to how it dishes out its plot a chunk at a time. The game world of Halo revolves around an ongoing war between the humans of Earth and a religious alliance of aliens called the Covenant. The background of the game involves a bunch of dates and planet names and protocols that are never mentioned in the game, but are included in the manual if the player is interested in learning about the backstory of the war. What starts the game off is a spaceship escaping the Battle of Reach, a planet you don't see and no one talks about. The humans lost the planet to the Covenant, and as the spaceship is escaping, a bunch of Covenant spaceships are chasing after them. This is pretty much where the game begins. The player takes control of the body of Master Chief, who's a cyborg soldier who's just chilling in cryo sleep, I guess. If you start the game and pick either the difficulty options of easy or normal, then the game has a tutorial that plays out. The tutorial is played out by being interactive, but the way the tutorial works is it's super slow. It kind of makes sense in a story perspective. I mean, if you were a frozen cyborg, then you'd need a technician or a medic to make sure everything's working when you wake up. The real issue I have with this is the fact that after you look at the dots in the camera tutorial, it changes your view to inverted. It then asks if you want to keep the camera inverted, but the problem with this is if the player doesn't understand what inverted means, or if they're just spamming the A button to get through the tutorial because it does go really, really slow, then they'll have to waste more time figuring out why their camera's reversed. I understand that the player is being punished for being impatient, but I don't see why having an inverted perspective tutorial was necessary either. The last bit of the tutorial is the game explaining the shield system. And nowadays, video game characters are considered bullet sponges who absorb a certain number of damage and then dart behind cover for a few seconds, then they can take damage again. Well, Halo 1 was one of the first, if not the first, mainstream game to really incorporate this. I like how it's contextualized into the game world since it makes sense for a futuristic cyborg robot dude to have shields. I mean, I don't know how many science fiction stuff I've seen where someone's like, add more power to the deflector shields, or something like that. I don't know. The shield mechanic is balanced out by having a health bar along with the shield bar, and the health bar that doesn't replenish over time. I mean, you should know what a health bar is if you're watching this video. But that also kind of makes sense, because if the bullets or plasma beams or whatever get through the shields, and, get through his armor, which can't recharge, then you would need some type of medical attention to deal with the human part of Master Chief. So it's nice that it does make sense if you think about it for a little bit. After the shield test, the player runs around the Pillar of Autumn, which is the name of the spaceship you're on, and it's currently being boarded by the Covenant. After getting to the bridge, the player is introduced to Captain Keyes and Cortana, who are the two people talking in the opening cutscene. Both are established as authority figures, and Cortana is given enough personality in the scene to warrant her as the main voice you're going to be hearing throughout the game. Keys gives the player their first weapon, which is arguably one of the better weapons in the game, the pistol. And the human pistol is a great weapon to start the game off with, since right after leaving the bridge, 3 grunts attack the player. The crosshairs for the pistol are the exact same size of a grunt's head, so killing the first 3 grunts are easy, and, it's gonna just teach the player how to shoot and kill stuff really quickly. The rest of the level is just the player going down corridors and going left or right or something like that, but the level is used more as a tutorial level than anything else, allowing the player to test out using the 2 different types of grenades and different types of weapons, as well as a flashlight and melee attack. What's worth mentioning in this level is that eventually you're led down a hallway that leads to an elite who has his back turned toward you. This allows the player to test out a melee attack on the back of an enemy, and that attack is considered an assassination. The assassination attack kills an enemy in 1 melee hit. So it gives you the option to learn about it without them specifically saying, to do an assassination attack, hit the B button on the target who's not facing you. It's just something you kind of figure out because of this scene, and I think it's a pretty nice touch in the game. The melee attack is a unique thing in Halo. Most first-person shooters before Halo had melee attacks, but they didn't have their own dedicated melee attack button. Instead, those games have the players switch to a new weapon, like a knife or a crowbar. Having the player use their guns to bash in their alien heads by the use of a button makes a lot of sense, so you don't have to constantly keep switching to another weapon, which makes the game more fluid, but it also fits contextually because, why would a cyborg need a tiny knife? I mean, he's a robot. His fists are stronger than knives, so there's no point really to switch to that. And also, bashing someone's head in with a rocket launcher is pretty satisfying, and I'd pick that over using a tiny little dagger or something. Anyway, after you kind of goof around on the spaceship for a little bit longer, you hop in an escape pod and you get shot down to the planet-sized ring for which the game is named after. The second level, cleverly titled Halo, does a good job showing off the exploration aspect of the game I was talking about earlier. As the level starts, Cortana suggests moving away from the crash site and gives the player a few options. The first option is to head north towards the waterfall and hide, waiting for Covenant dropships to show up. And another option is to just cross the bridge directly to your right, which triggers a few banshees to spawn that the player has to fight. And, it gives you a few different ways to kind of move around the game, but there's not one set dedicated strategy or option. The game is going to keep building more stuff for you to do, and now it kind of seems limited, but 15 years ago, that was pretty cool. After a huge firefight in Alien Ruin that demonstrates this arena setup I'm going to talk about later on, which is arguably one of the worst things about Halo, you see 3 escape pods that crash landed in the area nearby, and the player has to secure each landing site to finish the level. After getting the Warthog and navigating a cave, the player has 3 options on where to go to each of the 3 escape pods. The level isn't designed go down path 1 and save escape pod 1, or go down path 2 and save escape path 2, and you just keep moving on and on in a straight line. Instead, you're opened up into this sort of mini kind of hub area for just this one level. And if you explore it enough, you're going to find this one path that's going to lead to one escape pod that you have to secure, and then you kind of can go back to the hub, or maybe you can find another path that's going to lead somewhere else. And all the different escape pods are connected to this hub as well as to each other some of the time, which is kind of cool. And it really makes it so that if you want to, you can always play this level differently, and it's always going to play out in a unique way, because the game doesn't end with you going back to the hub. It actually ends whenever you secure the last escape pod. And so if you were to go down to point 1 first and then point 3 second, then the game or the level ends when you get to escape pod 2. If all that sort of makes sense. I don't know. There's a lot of numbers there. Could have been written better. This level also demonstrates the narrative form of exploration in Halo that also I was talking about. While driving through the tunnel and periodically throughout the game, Cortana will talk about Halo based off of data she's currently gathering. So the Covenant, Master Chief, Cortana, Captain Keyes, nobody knows about Halo. So as the player is learning something about Halo, it's the exact same time Master Chief and Cortana are learning something. That keeps the player feeling a part of the story and the world, because narratively, you're exploring the world. So no, you're not going in, you're not finding secrets all of the time, and the point of the game isn't to uncover a map of like the location. What you're actually doing, and what is super interesting, is that you have to figure out what Halo is, and it's like this big mystery. You literally have to explore this planet you're on, and that narrative exploration is incorporated, I think, very effectively in this game. As your character's exploring the world, so is the player. And what definitely adds to this is Master Chief himself. So the Chief is like not really a defined character. He is pretty much a silent protagonist. At least in the gameplay version of it, he is. He doesn't say anything while you're playing him. He only talks in cutscenes, and even then, his dialogue in those cutscenes, it's not character-defining stuff, and he says less than a page worth of words. His lack of talking and non-existent backstory allows the player to fall into his big robotic shoes. The player becomes really immersed in the game because they aren't playing an established character with a detailed origin. They're just controlling some faceless cyborg who doesn't say anything while they're controlling him. With all the escape pods secure and gaining a little background about Halo, it's off to free Captain Keyes, who's being held prisoner on a damaged Covenant cruiser. This level, titled The Truth and Reconciliation, showcases Halo's AI, which at the time was revolutionary, and even now is still pretty good. The enemy AI is more intelligent than most, with elites rolling out of the way of fire, or enemies in general running away from grenades, or if they are stuck with the sticky grenades, they usually charge at the player. Not to mention how the enemies go behind cover when they don't have a distinct advantage, so they're playing defensively too. And when an elite dies, the grunts around them all start running away. They're like, "Leader is dead!" So that's pretty good AI. I mean, some of this may just seem super common, but 15 years ago it wasn't. This was crazy. You had stuff like Doom, where some alien thingy is just shooting fireballs at you and will stand still until you kill its face off. The human AI isn't as good as the Covenant AI, but I mean, they do try to get out of the way of moving vehicles, which is pretty nice. They don't usually succeed that well, but I mean, they try. They also don't find cover that well, unless there's a scripted section, and they usually just end up standing in the line of fire, getting mowed down by some of the weaker enemies. In fact, there's like a moment later when a whole squad gets wiped out by the weakest enemies in the entire game, but I'll get into that later. This level is a good scripted sequence that has the human AI take on the Covenant forces in a pretty cool way. So you get to a small kind of like basin ridge-like area with a bridge. The Marines are programmed to wait behind until you make your way all around to the left side of the basin. Once you hit a certain point on like the left side area, the Marines are going to charge the bridge, leaving the Covenant open for a flanking attack by the player. This is nice since it rewards the player for taking a more tactical approach and using the area around it, which is sort of what Halo is kind of really about. You're not supposed to just keep running in head first and shooting stuff. In fact, you're more rewarded by using the areas around you. This is heavily reinforced by the fact of how slow Master Chief actually moves. Without the ability to run faster with a sprint, or just having his normal speed be as slow as it is, I think it's a really good thing. You don't rush into stuff. That's not how you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be a trained soldier, and you're moving slow to assess certain situations and make running in an open area seem dangerous. You're not trying to outrun a tank, you're trying to take down the tank, and you need to do that by moving between cover and actually playing the game the way that it would be played, as if Master Chief was really in this situation. It really helps you get into the character's shoes, and it really makes the game a much more rewarding experience, and that's super dope. Plasma turrets are also introduced in this level, and I don't think their inclusion is bad, but the level opens by trying to incorporate some stealth snipery stuff. These turrets are supposed to be the punishment for being detected. They're designed in a way that makes picking off the turret operators just too easy, and because of that, they're not as threatening as they could be. The second enemy introduced are the hunters, which are just as easy to deal with as the turrets. At first they look threatening, but it only takes one pistol shot in their giant-ass weak spots on their back to kill them. The hunters could have been so much more. They were at least designed to be a big threat, but the fact that their weak spots are just as big as they are makes them pretty much a pushover. Anyway, after killing the hunters, you board the spaceship, and the player and a group of Marines are trapped in an arena-style room awaiting a few waves of enemies until the door opens. This is pretty much what I'm talking about. Actually, right before this, you're in another arena area waiting for the hunters to come down. Some of the worst design in Halo. It's still not bad design, but it really goes against what I like about Halo. It's the stuff I hate the most. And that would be when you get to a big enough area, and then you're trapped in that area, and you have to stay in that area as doors open, or as Covenant come through windows, or whatever the fuck they come from, and you have to kill first wave of Covenant, kill second wave of Covenant, kill third wave of Covenant, kill a bunch of hunters. Then the door opens, or then you can continue on where you need to go. And this sort of halts the pacing of the game, and it just doesn't make any sense why the waves are coming in the way that they do, or how they come from areas behind you that you already cleared out, just because they want more shit for you to fight. But I do see sort of like the appeal that it's constantly testing players to do stuff, because if you're always sitting back behind cover, or you're always, using a sniper rifle or something like that, you can take stuff out from a distance, which I think is a legitimate thing that you can do. It does test the player to be able to think on their feet in a much more tight situation. The problem is that this happens at least once a level, and it just gets so boring, especially if you die and you have to play through it again when you're sitting there waiting for enemies to spawn, and you can't just continue on playing the game. What makes entering this ship's arena battle a little bit more interesting, which is good, is that the very first wave has an invisible elite, which is something we haven't seen yet. He's got an energy sword, which is also something we haven't seen yet, and the energy sword is pretty cool. They're one-shot kills. This makes him like one of the most challenging things in the entire game, since you can't run up next to them and melee them, and you have to really try and take them down from a distance, but they're just constantly sprinting at you. Because if they get that one hit versus however many hits it's going to take you to take him out, he's done. So it does make the arena thing a little bit more interesting, considering they added in a much bigger threat. Making your way through the spaceship is a little more interesting than people would think it is. So despite the level showcasing some of the worst parts by having narrow hallways and a few more arena sections, it also has all these different side passages and rooms that contain ammo or power-ups and health kits, which makes the exploration actually rewarding. So if you go into a room you're not supposed to go into, oh look, there's a whole bunch of ammo, and it's just if you go down to this corridor and then you turn right, and look, it's a power-up, it's more ammo for your favorite gun, it's a health kit. It's giving the player more stuff to do, so they are kind of looking around and they're really exploring, if they want to, at this point, this spaceship. But at the same time, the spaceship is supposed to just get you to save Captain Keyes. At this point in time, you're not trying to figure out Halo. You have other pressing matters. After rescuing Keyes, he says that Halo is a weapon, and that the Covenant are trying to activate it and use it to blow up Earth or something. Cortana tries to locate the coordinates to Halo's control room, while Master Chief and Captain Keyes try to escape the Covenant cruise ship. Cortana doesn't actually find the control room just yet. Instead, she finds a map room that will lead either the Covenant or the Marines to Halo's control room. This leads into my personal favorite mission in the entire game, the Silent Cartographer. This level takes place on an island, and the mission is to make it to the map room before the Covenant. One thing I just want to put out real quick is I like how when you look up into the sky, you can always see the ring, which is a pretty nice touch, since the way a ring is shaped, you'd always be able to see the other end of the ring. Anyway, you get to this neat little area. If you kind of are sneaky enough, you can see the scene of a large group of jackals just hanging around in a circle, just chilling. I mean, you just toss a little grenade in there and they're gonna have just a fun day. Just a fun day. There are a few caves along the island that add just a little bit more to it, and if the player chooses to go through them, they get a sense that it's more than just this path you're directed on. Eventually, the game directs the player to go inland by a pass and some rocks, and here we get another Hunter arena match where they're disposed of as quickly as ever. Hunters are unique in the fact that they can't be killed unless you hit them in their weak spots, and this is a really cool concept. The giant orange kill me here targets on their backs are just a letdown. If they were just a little bit smaller, if it wasn't such a big spot, they would be more enjoyable. And if it wasn't one pistol shot, they wouldn't be so easy to kill. After the fight, there are a few overshields, and I guess this is a good enough time as any to talk about the overshields. There are 2 power-ups in Halo, overshields and invisibility. Overshields triple the player's shield strength, but they don't recharge. And invisibility is sort of self-explanatory. What's cool about it is it fades in and out if the player attacks with it active, and it only lasts for a short duration. Unlike overshield, which lasts until the shields run out and then you recharge and get your old shields back. These are the usual rewards for exploring, giving the player a decent motivation to explore since it makes the current situation they're in easier to tackle. What makes exploring in Halo pretty effective is that all the stuff that you get, you can use then and there. Overshields are always going to be nice, and invisibility is usually placed in sections where their enemies currently are, so it's not being wasted. I've actually gone a long time without talking about the main form of combat in Halo, the guns. The weapons in the Halo universe are designed actually pretty well, at least the way they look and they sound, so, they fire like guns, but I'm going to talk more aesthetically, and that's what I really think Halo does a pretty good job. The human weapons are blocky and either black or gray, and they always shoot this orange muzzle flare, or like a smoke line if you're using a rocket launcher or a sniper rifle. The Covenant weapons are round, and they shoot out either blue or green blasts, except for the Needler, which shoots out purpley spikes. This distinguishes the weapons, so the player always knows what's being fired at them at all times. They also sound totally different, too. This is like a huge testament to the way these weapons are designed, that if any gun is fired, I can immediately tell if it's a Covenant or a human weapon, and based off of what's being fired, I can tell every single Covenant weapon apart, and I can tell a lot of human weapons apart, if not every human weapon apart, simply based on how it looks and how it sounds. Like just seeing the muzzle flare and then hearing the sound design from it. And I think that's huge. Alright, so back to the level. After the player makes their way into the structure, they find the map room. It turns out the team has lost contact with Captain Keyes. That doesn't really matter. We'll get to that later. We have to go exploring in some snow instead. The following mission has you making your way into Halo's control center, which is a snowy mountain region. This is a pretty nice change of scenery since most levels are like gray buildings and green landscapes. Purple alien ship is probably still pretty fresh in your mind. This level is divided into 2 segments, the scaling down the structure that you start in part, and then the driving the tank part. The tank is a pretty good vehicle. It's heavy and it deals a lot of damage, and the player has the option to drive a Warthog or Ghost also, which are lighter, faster modes of transportation. They're flimsy. It's one of the worst parts about using these types of vehicles is that when you touch something, you just kind of go flying. With one little bit of damage or a bump in the road will just send the cars going crazy. The controls for these two just feel a little too ragdolly to be any real fun. In this level is where the Wraith makes its first appearance. The Wraith is the only non-playable vehicle in the game. The elites can pilot the Wraith tank, but the players can't. It's interesting in that aspect, but other than that, I don't know. Unlike the human Scorpion tank, the Wraith tank has no mid-range minigun, but it has this very large artillery-like plasma bomb that is a one-shot kill if you get hit by it. Wraiths are meaty, which makes them a challenge if you were to take one out, but honestly, they're so slow, it's easier to just ignore them most of the time. However, the level design for this first encounter of the Wraith is one of my favorite in the whole game. So, when you come out of the building, a ridge with a few plasma turrets is placed right in front of the player. The player is naturally drawn to look at the turrets, which are currently firing at a squad of Marines on the left. The player is then drawn to looking at the Marines, and finally the nearby plasma turret only a few feet in front of the player off to the very far left. And the game wants the player to go left and save the Marines, but how the player goes about doing it is entirely up to them. The first option would be to use the nearby plasma turret and shoot down the Covenant on the ridge. The other option would be to pick off the Covenant on the other side of the ridge from a closer distance. There are also ghosts that can be used, or rocket launchers and a sniper rifle if the player wanted to do everything on foot. I like how this area gives the player a lot of options to explore around and find the way to handle the situation they like best. Now after the Marines are saved, and ending up all the way on the left side of this area, this leaves this new threat, which is the Wraith, which is all the way to the right. There's a lot of room and a few hills and ridges surrounding the Wraith that allow the player to navigate if they didn't want to just rush right at them. But the player needs to get all the way to the right. They need to get past the tank to progress through the level. But the options of taking out the vehicle are, just as numerous to the ones leading up to it. It's areas like these that really showcase Halo as a game. It's more than just walking down hallways and blindly shooting at aliens. It's more tactical, and it's designed in a very good way at times. And I love this place. It's one of the first things I think of when I think of Halo, as I just think of this spot. After making your way up to the control room, Cortana starts babbling about how we have to stop Keyes, and we leave her in the control room and bust off to wherever Captain Keyes currently is, because apparently we found him. This takes us to the Swamp Ruins level. I like how you're always a few steps behind the Marines here. You can see them on your radar, and you can see assault rifle fire coming from the ruins before you enter. Not having Cortana around for this level is a good design choice, because having the silence of you walking slowly past all the Covenant corpses adds a lot of atmosphere. The game wants you to be afraid of what you're going to face next. After what might be the longest cutscene in the game, the big threat of the series is introduced: the Flood. While they're all built up to be threatening, I just can't be afraid of little tiny yellow balloons. I mean, look at them. They're so small. As you leave the arena, you need to run back outside by going the way you came. The Flood are interesting because they're parasites. They take over a host body, making a deformed zombie out of them. What's cool about this is that when you kill an infected elite or marine but don't dismember them, then another Flood can possess that body, and it'll just get right back up. The Flood are a good enemy once they possess a body, since they no longer die in one hit, and just popping all over the place. Anyway, the level design here isn't great. There are a bunch of hallways that lead to one open area, and then you're back in a hallway, and then another open area. It gets repetitive. Once the player gets outside of the ruins, they're saved by 343 Guilty Spark, who calls himself the monitor of the Halo installation. He teleports Master Chief to the library to get the key to activate Halo's defense systems. It's at this point in the game where the plot becomes a jumble of words. You need to get the index to activate the installation's defense systems to eradicate the Flood. That's a mouthful. The next level has you running around the library, and I actually don't mind the repetitive nature of this level. Just this level. I mean, it's a giant library. It's supposed to be boring. The added threat of being chased by the Flood is nice. It keeps the monotony at bay. When the player reaches the index, the monitor teleports Chief back to the control room. As you go to activate Halo's defense systems, Cortana stops the activation and says that Halo will wipe out all life in the universe, and she gets real sassy about it and whatever. The premise of Halo destroying all organisms that house the Flood is weird. I mean, it's at this point the game starts to fall into the fantastical. I mean, I don't know how the Flood could have starved to death, but still existed in Halo this whole time. And if some didn't die of starvation, then why would they lock themselves up? Who locked the Flood up? And if they could have been locked up by the Forerunners, why do they need to build Halo in the first place? It's just whatever. Moving on. The Oracle gets pissed that Cortana stopped the activation, but I like how naturally surprised he was. The player didn't know that they were about to destroy the freaking universe or whatever. This level begins the trend of reusing levels. This time, instead of driving a tank through the snow, you're flying a Banshee, but it's still the exact same level. It's worth mentioning that the Covenant will fight the Flood, but it's also worth saying that if you're nearby, both factions will do that classic video game bullshit where they just stop fighting each other and they just turn and start attacking you. Teamwork. Anyway, the point of this mission is to distract the monitor so Cortana can locate Captain Keyes, who has the activation codes for the Pillar of Autumn, which Cortana plans on using to overload its engines and destroy Halo. The plot explodes. Up until this level, the plot was to find out what Halo was, and then it's like, Halo's a weapon, now we have to stop the Covenant from using it, and now it's, we gotta stop the monitor from activating it, and we have to do that by blowing up our own spaceship. They say that, but with a lot bigger words. So, now that there's so much going on, the player just kind of rolls with whatever Cortana is suggesting, since she seems to have a pretty good grasp on everything. It turns out Captain Keyes was captured, again, and is located back at the Truth and Reconciliation, again. The Flood are trying to repair the ship to escape off of Halo, while the Covenant are sending in an elite unit to destroy the cruiser before that happens. I guess that's kind of good. I mean, it's basically an excuse to have more advanced Covenant and Flood at the same place at the same time. You go through the exact same ship as you went in before, and eventually you find Captain Keyes. Keyes is dead, and it looks like he was fungally fused with some other Marines, turning him into this gross blob. If you walk up next to him, you can hear some pretty weird noises coming off from him. There are also some advanced Covenant in black armor that have better weapons and act more aggressively than the usual ones. The difficulty of the game is pretty good, but it's clear that the design team ran out of time and their solution was to have players go through the first, third, and fifth levels backwards with just way more enemies in them this time. After leaving the Truth and Reconciliation for the second time, you end up back at the Pillar of Autumn, which starts the final level. The Pillar of Autumn has you play the level backwards until you end up at the bridge. Turns out the Monitor is here, and so are the Flood. The Monitor is trying to stop you, and the Flood are trying to repair the spaceship. Cortana says the only way for you to blow up Halo is to throw a grenade or something into a few engines. Making your way to the engine room this time is pretty boring since you've walked down these hallways before. There is a cool moment I had while recording this footage. Apparently there's an armory. Now look, I've beaten Halo 1 a lot of times over the past decade. I never noticed this room's existence until this current playthrough. Inside there are a bunch of rocket launchers and more importantly, and way more importantly, they're invisible blood. I'm sorry, I'm still just so excited about this. They're the only invisible Flood in the entire game. They're only in this one room, which is a shame, but I think it's because they're the most challenging enemies in the entire game. It was just so cool. After the armory is the engine room, which is essentially the final boss fight of the game. Also, I should add that at this moment, Cortana says if you need more stuff, there's an armory room. I guess I just didn't care because the Flood in this room always drop grenades, so you never really need to go to the armory. Anyway, you throw a grenade at some weak spot 4 times, and the game just kind of seems really rushed. This massive conclusion takes place in one room, and the giant spaceship is exploding. This huge place that could be doing so much stuff, and the only thing you really do happens in one room where you repeat the same task 4 times. After the engine room, you hop on a warthog of your choice and zoom on down through the spaceship at max speed. The way this ending race against time plays out is pretty cool, but the amount of ramps and extra platforms are just always super weird to me. It just didn't make sense why this hallway would really be built in the ship. After Fohammer's death, the player has another sprint down a hallway and hops in a small spaceship and flies off, and Halo explodes, and Cortana weirdly starts defending her actions and killing all creatures, including any surviving humans on the ring. I guess that is understandable, but I don't know why she had to be such sour grapes after the player beat the game. At the end, Master Chief says his final words of, "This is only the beginning," and I mean, he wasn't wrong. What's so interesting about Halo is that the first 2/3 of the game are pretty strong, and the last third is unfortunately reused levels, but the levels give a variety in locations while not really succumbing to tropes. The design of calmer hallway sections leading into tactical battle arenas is not the greatest thing because it happens so much. If it was to be spaced out just a little bit and it didn't have to put, like in Truth and Reconciliation where they're back to back. A great example is the Wraith scene where you're going down a bunch of hallways and then you're given this big battle section. That's done really well, and there are other examples of it being done very well. Like going down all the hallways and then fighting the Flood for the first time. The game does have solid pacing until the last half of the story where it seems like Bungie just sort of ran out of time. I think what Halo had was more tactical gameplay that made it the better option to flank an enemy than to rush at them. And most of the bigger combat areas felt like they were designed with slower, more tactical gameplay in mind. Halo doesn't completely ditch its exploration gameplay aspect either, since power-ups are littered throughout every level, along with better weapons and health kits, and also Invisible Flood. That's still super cool, and why has that not been in any other Halo? Unless they've been in other Halos, just like, I'm naturally skipping all the Invisible Flood rooms. That'd be weird. Exploration is a term that has become more popular to use in the past decade, mainly as a term to criticize games for having a lack of exploration. If a game is linear, i.e. the progression of the game being start at point A, end at point B, it's considered to lack the concept of exploration. There are plenty of examples proving this false, one of them being Gone Home. In Gone Home, you start at the front door of a house and you end in the attic, essentially point A, point B. The exploration in the game comes from how you get from point A to point B. You get to move about the house and discover things and just really explore the house, and by proxy, the game. This is a linear game. It only has one ending, and that one ending is achieved by reaching one specific location. But most would agree that Gone Home is a game about exploring. I would say the same thing about Halo, but it's also incorporated into the story as well. The characters are exploring an alien planet, and they're trying to piece everything together and make sense of what's happening. Both games reward the players for exploring the levels. The rewards just aren't alternate endings. I'm not sure about all of this, but it feels to me like people think a game needs more branching paths and more bonus content to be considered anything of merit nowadays. And that's kind of like why I wanted to make this video, because I think Halo is a game that carried a series of consoles and one of the most popular genres pretty much on its shoulders. It did a lot of things right, and sure, there was a clear development crunch at the end where the levels became repeats, but I still see it as a really strong game. The game's fun, it rewards the players for playing differently, and the replayability comes from tackling old situations in a new way, and not by making you super strong, like giving you God mode or New Game Plus shenanigans. It's just when you're in a combat situation, you know that this way leads to this, but you never tried going around and taking this other flanking option. And that's super cool. Thank you so much for watching and listening to me go on about Halo. I'm not super big in the series, as I feel like it definitely drifted off somewhere down the line, but I for sure like what it started with.